Last week, our good friend Richard came back, talked to us about the second part of that trilogy talk, the principles of the pod and the cataclysms in the Industrial 4.0 revolution. More to come on that next week when he comes back to have kind of the wrap-up conversation and dialogue there. However, this week, I am very excited to have a guest here today who can really hit that last bolded comment there that you see. None of the speakers so far have really been in a position to speak on that or really kind of dived into it. He is. He is an entrepreneurial thought leader in the learning and education technology industry. He's been working since 2010 to transform that industry. He personally has completed over 200 online courses. He graduated from U of M in 1994. And he was one of this class's first speakers when it started back in like 08, 09. We brought him back from Boston to speak with you today, where he volunteers out in Boston to help nonprofits apply their management skills to business solutions. And he's also, as you might have imagined, a business owner and leader, the CEO of Extension Engine. Please help me welcome Furgan Nazeeri.
Well, thank you. Can you guys hear me? So I'm 52, and I was in your seat 30 years ago. And I actually do a reasonable amount of public speaking, but I have to say, this one makes me a little nervous. And the reason is because I was in your shoes, and I feel pressure to kind of give some good advice and see if I can help. It's like, you ever seen those Reddit questions? It's like, if you could give yourself some advice 30 years ago, what would you tell your younger self? And then it's usually like, sell Bitcoin at 65,000. So I'm going to try to give you some good advice. And it's a little bit different. And the advice I want to give is, how do you choose what to do over your career? Like, what are the principles for making good decisions? And I liken it to, in life, you get this GPS system, which is your education. And all the tools you get in high school and here in college, and if you go on for further learning, these are tools to help you make decisions. And you have, think of it like a GPS system in a car. You type in your destination, and the system figures out where you're at, tells you, turn left here, turn right there. If you make a wrong turn, it helps you get back on path. And that's the tools that you have from an education here. The challenge is it has no point of view as to what you should type in as your destination. Like, where should you go? And so I wanted to tell you a story about my decisions, and if I could go back 30 years, what advice would I give to my younger self? I'll start out with the interesting stuff, which is the stuff not on your resume. So I was born in Detroit, and but mostly grew up in Oregon, rural Oregon, in a town called Boring. And that's my younger sister, also went to Michigan, and me, and mostly grew up, on a farm out in the middle of nowhere, always building things. And if you had asked me then what I wanted to do in life, I would have said something like, I want to do something where I don't get dirty. So I had very basic needs early on. I applied to one school, Michigan, through a twist of fate. It was an easy decision. My dad said he'd pay for school if I went to school in the state of Michigan. And when I got here, I actually was originally in the College of LS&A, and very quickly I was like, well, where do I get to build something? And they were like, oh, College of Engineering. So I actually transferred into engineering in the first semester. And I thought it was cool because that's where I would get to build stuff. And I very serendipity got me into the aerospace engineering department. It was literally, I bumped into a professor in EHour who was carrying this heavy briefcase, and he was one of the original NASA employees who helped put the Apollo mission on the moon. And he started telling me stories about that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to go into this guy's class. So I got a degree in aerospace engineering. And my sort of anchor at that point was really, I just wanted to build stuff for a living. And I thought that would be cool. And so that put me on that course. But the reality is, I majored in solar car and I minored in aerospace engineering. I'm curious, raise your hand if you've heard of the solar car team. Okay, so that's like a third of it. So that's pretty, like when I was here, no one had heard of it, including my parents, much to their dismay. I was team leader for the solar car team. I spent 3 years working on the project. I ended up dropping out of school for 1.5 years, and it was a remarkable experience for me. We raced in 2 races. One was a US race, it was a couple thousand miles across the US, and it was against like 50 other college teams. We won a national championship. It was an extraordinary experience. And then we got to go to the World Championship in Australia, and we competed against professional as well as other college teams. And we finished 11th in the world, so Honda won that year. And the experience really was very entrepreneurial. We were a bunch of students designing, building, racing this car. What was fun about that experience is how pure the mission was. It was my first real experience of having kind of a focused goal. And our mission, which we clarified in this statement, we said, earn the victory, move the world. So our goal was to win the race. It was just a clear mission. It was lowest cumulative elapsed time, measured in seconds. So every action we took on the team, we could just ask ourselves, does this help reduce the risk-adjusted minimum time for the race? And the purity of that was intoxicating. Like, all of us were so mission-focused on doing that. And we had this idea that, well, if we could win the race, that was the best case to showcase alternative energy and solar power and electric cars and help teach kids. And we were learning ourselves, so we were, earning the victory and moving the world. That was the mission for that. The team, well, I have 3 things to say about this picture. The first is, no, that's not some funny Instagram filter to make it look like an old photo. It's actually an old photo. And the second is that bald guy in the bottom left is not me. I'm the strapping young lad behind him with a full head of hair. And the third is that this is a bunch of people. It was taken in the EHour atrium over there, and there were over 300 students on the team from College of Engineering, LS&A, the business school, arts. We had an extraordinary group, faculty, staff. It was just an amazing organization. And what's interesting is, so this is 30 years ago, the folks on this team have gone on to continue to be remarkable people and do extraordinary things. It includes Eric, who's chief engineer at NASA JPL. He's got all kinds of hardware on Mars and other places. It's got many CEOs of companies, including Larry Page, co-founder of Google. It's got a Lego master, the designer of our car. He was on Netflix, has a TV show called Lego Master. He was on an episode of that. And of course, there's many public leaders and parents. It's just, you are among amazing people, and you will find out over the coming decades how amazing. The car itself was actually put in a museum. It's in the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. And this is actually a picture of me and my son a few years ago. And we went back to the museum and got to, after hours, kind of take the car apart and stuff. It was amazing. You know how they say in high school when you get in trouble that if you make a mistake, it goes on your permanent record? I can attest that it does not. But when you win a race like this, it does go on your permanent record. It's a symbol of success. And I have to say, going back to the museum and seeing that was super rewarding. So after I graduated, my first real job was working at a startup making passenger electric cars. This is a car, it's called Reva. And there were about 20 of us from the solar car team who got hired by this company. It was a startup. The guy who founded it, his name's Lon Bell, and he had previously invented airbag crash sensors, sold his company for $1 billion, and then took $50 million of his own money and started this company. He hired a bunch of EV people, which included 20 of us kids. So we were like employees 40 through 60. We went public, raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and we were building electric cars, and our goal was to change the world. We were going to get rid of gasoline-powered cars. We were going to make alternative energy a thing, and we were fighting the big fight against the car companies. This is like the mid-1990s. What was organizing for me about this decision to do this as my first job was the mission was, change the world. Like we were really focused on this idea of, the environment. Back then, Al Gore and Inconvenient Truth, all this stuff was really happening, and we thought we were the people that were going to make this change. And what's interesting is the company itself was successful. So it's a $2 billion publicly traded company, but it doesn't sell electric cars. And so we actually failed in our mission. They sell components. Actually, the thing they sell are seats for cars. So we made all these cars, but the only thing that worked was the seats. And and then we lost to the big car companies. It was, prior to Tesla, the largest selling EV in the world. And that was super motivating, that mission, and also super frustrating, because as a young person, this is my first real job, and it felt like it didn't work. I had applied to business school and got into Harvard Business School in Boston, and that was, for me, a chance to kind of go back and get more tools in my toolbox. I felt like, I needed a better GPS system. I needed to be able to make better decisions. The engineering degree helped me, but I felt like I really wanted to have more tools and to avoid what had just happened, like getting crushed by these car companies. It was an amazing experience. I think I did get a lot of those tools. I also met a ton of really amazing people. And the third thing was, it's taught in the case method. So at Harvard, they never do this. They never lecture to people. They have a thing called the case method and cold calls and stuff like that. If you ever get a chance, it's an awesome way to learn. What it did afford me to do was to make another decision, which is I wanted to change industries. And so I got out of the automotive industry and into financial technology industry. And I was founder and later CEO of a couple of different venture-backed companies. So one was Altgate Capital in the hedge fund world, and that was a financial failure. And then the second was Pivot, and we built what became the largest trading and communication platform for alternative investments. And then we sold that to CME. And that was a successful business, but it was financially successful, even though at the time the economy imploded. And that was another chance for me to kind of take a step back and sort of say, well, what do I want to do? What's the road ahead of me? And I became what's called an entrepreneur in residence at one of my investors, SoftBank. And I spent a year investing, and the plan at the time was to cook up another fintech company and go do that. And during that time period, I had an epiphany, actually 2 epiphanies. So the first one was I didn't like fintech. And the second one was I loathed venture capital. I really wanted to do something that I was passionate about, that I cared about, and it wasn't just about money. That brought me to a small company at the time called Extension Engine, and it had been founded by actually a friend of mine, and I'd known him socially for a decade. I was a customer. I had hired the company to do some work, and it was a great organization. So I joined the company. I bought half the company, and later became CEO. And we're experts in tech services. We work in 2 areas. One is education, and the other is life sciences. And so we build online learning programs, and we also do clinical trials around the world. So in terms of online learning, we've built maybe 200, and it includes everything from like Harvard Business School online, and actually all the Harvard stuff, medical school, law school. We've done stuff for companies like McKinsey Academy and Microsoft and J&J Academy, and then lots of really cool nonprofits. In the clinical trials world, we've done about 1,500 clinical trials, which is where we set up all the technology to collect data, like in 100 countries and 60 languages. It's really fun because we get to, help educate, people around the world and help work on curing diseases. The team is a team of about 300 folks in the US and Europe. And importantly, we have no outside investors, no bank debt, and we are focused on, doing cool stuff. Our plan is to grow organically. Our goal is in 5 years to be a team of 1,000 and expand globally. So for the last 13 years, I've been building this company, and for me, I've been trying to focus on building an anchor for why this company is going to be different and why we'll be a great place to work. We have these 5 company values. You won't find them on our website or featured in our client work, but it's internally, it's how we sort of think about what makes us us. As an owner of the company and CEO, it's also, these are company values, but I think of them as like my personal values. It's how I run my own life. And so I wanted to share these with you. They have evolved a little bit, but I would say these have been mostly constant over the last 13 years. The first one is about curiosity. It's this idea of insatiably seeking new knowledge. Honing your craft, asking lots and lots of questions. And I'm this person, anyways. Like I go to, and I bet many of you do this too. Like I go to Starbucks and I'm standing in the line and I'm like, how can I make this line go more quickly? Like what process could I run? And how do they decide what drink goes on the menu? And then you get to the front and you're like, how do they make that little leaf in the coffee, foam on top of it? It's asking like why and why not. Curiosity is like the thing that got you in this seat. Think of all your friends in high school that were not curious. And so when I wanted to build a company that was a whole bunch of just curious people, and curious people find interesting problems to solve. And for me, that is a super important anchor in what makes me happy. Another value is humility and being humble. To me, that means letting your work tell your story. It's not like hyping yourself. It's being a team player. and taking joy in helping others succeed. Who knows? Have you ever heard of this word Schadenfreude? Does anyone know? Raise your hand if you know the meaning of this word Schadenfreude. There's a couple people. So it's German, I think, but it's common. It means taking joy in other people's misery. There's another word, that's a pretty common word. There's another word called compersion. Does anyone know the meaning of that word? Raise your hand if you know compersion. So compersion is taking joy in other people's happiness. And that's a really cool word. And I think it's a big part of being humble is letting other people shine, helping other people do great, and then getting joy from other people's happiness. I really love that, and I love people that like to do that, and that's another one of our core values. The next one here is talking about honesty. Honesty is, giving feedback well. They've done actually research on this. I've read research on how do you give good feedback. And good feedback has 4 things. It's relevant, it's timely, it's specific, and it's actionable. And so we focus a lot on just being direct and being honest and offering candor in the moment. I think a sort of a sister of honesty is transparency. I can be honest with you and actually not tell you anything. But being transparent is super important. I have a saying that good news travels fast and bad news travels faster. I think that is really important. It's something I learned on the solar car team is, you can't hide bad news, and being honest, not just with others, but honest with yourself. Like, how long is this really going to take? And so that is a huge anchor for us in the business. This idea of being whole means, living a rich life. I think people work to live. They don't live to work. And a lot of startups fall into the trap of sort of describing what they do as your second family. And I'm of the mind that no thank you. I already have a family. It's quite a nice one. And we'll be purposeful with our time here. It's also this idea of inclusion. Great teams are inclusive of lots of different points of view. And those points of view actually inform the work and make it better. And so for us, it's not about working crazy hours and prioritizing work over other things. It's about doing those other things and bringing that to work to create a better environment. And the last sort of tip here is about excellence. There's this idea of striving to be an expert. Being great at something feels awesome. Winning a national championship was being an expert, and I love that feeling, and it's really important to have that sort of quality. There's a story, if anyone's read Steve Jobs' biography, he was a tough guy, but he did some really interesting stuff. And there's one story in there that struck me, which is a young Steve Jobs was telling a story about his dad, who I think was a carpenter or maybe it was a hobby. In any event, he was working on some dressers, some furniture, and he was, polishing, working on this thing. And in fact, he was working on the back of the dresser, the part that's up against the wall. And a young Steve Jobs said to him, Dad, why are you working on the back of this dresser? Like, no one's going to see it. And his dad had said to him, he's like, you're right, except for no one's going to see it except for me. And it was that pride of craftsmanship. And in fact, that was, Steve Jobs told the story in the concept of like why they put so much into the products and how they did it. And in fact, my first computer, which I still have, was an Apple Macintosh. And I don't know if you've ever seen them, but it's like this box. It's like a coffee stand. And if you open it up on this box, it's like screwdrivers. You open it up, and on the inside of it, there's all this cool stuff, including they're hand-signed by the original team that built these things. And I'm always reminded of that story and what excellence is. So I always want our team to kind of strive for that level of excellence. So I think we're going to talk a little bit more and have a chance to talk about some advice. But that's what I would say is I started out trying to think about a mission that was clear and concise. And the challenge with that was you can't keep chasing time. You can't keep chasing that mission. Like once you achieve your goal, you're like the dog that caught the car. So I needed something bigger than that. So then I started chasing things like, well, I'll pick a big problem in the world and I'll try to solve that. And I think that's actually good. I have many friends who stuck with it and have done extraordinary things in solar energy and electric cars. And I think for me, I moved from that to doing things that personally I valued in life. Like it's what makes me happy. If there's one piece of research I could point you to, just Google Harvard Happiness Study. It's like a 75-year longitudinal study of what happiness, and they check in with people every year for like 75 years, and now their kids and stuff like that, and what makes them happy. And it turns out happiness is driven by a lot of things. One is helping other people and things like that, having great connections. But it's sticking to your values and doing things that you value. So that would be my advice is the destination to type into your GPS are things that matter to you.
That's perfect. Thank you, Furgan. That's awesome. I feel like I could sit here for another hour worth of kind of thoughts and advice on what to do because I loved all those points you touched on. To that note about happiness and about the importance of it and how to maintain that, I want to go back to what you said about conversion. When you're leading a company that has 300 and you want to triple the growth of that, how do you ensure and how do you cultivate that value within the organization? You can hire it in and you can kind of filter for it, but once people are there and it's rolling, how do you continue to feed it and ensure that people are appreciating its worth?
I think that's a real challenge. I think that, I would say what I do is I live it. So I try to personify the values of the company. And then I try to communicate it. I used to, for the first 100 and some people in the company, I interviewed every single person who joined the company. And, I was hiring people that fit like that story. I would tell them a version of the story that I just told you about how I came to do this, and I would talk to them about what I wanted to create. And most of the people, they would show up and they were like, oh, well, where's our, hockey stick? Your startup and we're, so, there's this thing you do, you pitch to the investors, you tell them I'm going to do this hockey stick thing. And then I would say, no, I don't sell hockey sticks. I sell broomsticks, straight, up and to the right, And so I communicate this a lot. And I, the first group of people, we hired people that were like-minded. And then now, so I don't get to interview every single person, but I do meet with every single person, sometimes in groups, and I walk them through. Again, this is the story that I tell them. I tell them, this is my personal story. These are the values that we find important. And I say, look, if you're going to be in positions where you have to make decisions, between A and B. And I say, look, the decision is clear. Go look to the values and and see what's the right thing to do. And then when people do that, I'll celebrate it, communicate it, point it out. Hey, that's great. That's a great representation of our values.
Trying to lead from example and lead from the top down and prioritizing that. I feel like, and you kind of referenced the idea of being an EIR at SoftBank enabled you to have this introspective time period where you were like, I don't want to do this. I loathe venture capital. I want to do something different. Do you think it's critical for students to gain or to have an opportunity to have that type of introspection and have that type of experience, maybe post-graduation, where they can look back to what they thought they were going to do and pivot it or decide on whether they want to pivot it?
I'm glad you asked that question, because you'll see I had like these points where I changed kind of what I did, and in each one, it wasn't. Oftentimes, they'll be in a job, and then, they'll quit or get fired, and then a month or two goes by, and then they'll get another job. And so you have this moment where you have to decide, like, what job am I going to get? And it's hard to make good decisions when you're don't have a paycheck and you're forced to make it in a short period of time. So what I did, and this wasn't really thoughtful at the time, is I always had opportunities to make those changes by looking around. So the first for me was solar car. So I got to see a lot of different things beyond what the normal student gets and so that helped me make the first job decision. And then I went to business school, and that was like 2 years of checking everything out. And then I got to make another decision. And then I did this year at SoftBank where it was almost like a third degree, where I spent a year kind of looking at lots of different things and made a decision. So I really recommend those kinds of opportunities and jobs. Like, sometimes like consulting companies are good for this. Like, you can go there and you can go see a lot of different things. So give yourself an opportunity to kind of sample, the menu before you have to like dive in and make a jump.
I want to pivot this back a little bit to the actual work that Extension Engine is doing and the client building that you're doing. Be it the students who we're encouraging to have that opportunity and create that opportunity to be introspective and figure out where they want to go. And hopefully some of them will go into higher education, because we need good leadership in higher education, so please don't not think of that as an industry. And when you're actually going to work with higher ed leaders, and that's the client that you're focusing in on, what percentage of those do you have to kind of enlighten and essentially sell on the notion of why they need to evolve the pedagogy and why they need to evolve the medium and the format they use, versus how much do you actually just have to service? They're already there, they already get it, and they're just looking for someone to technically bring it to life.
This is being recorded, right?
That's okay.
So the higher ed's a really interesting client base. They are designed around not changing. I actually think Michigan is an outlier because there is a lot of change and a lot of innovation that happens here. It's interesting to look at, like, so for example, I do, as a company, like half our business is building online learning programs. And we do that for a bunch of really innovative universities. And then a lot of work, most of our work is outside of universities, so corporations and nonprofits other than higher ed. What's interesting is that most universities are, fast followers on this stuff. They're not particularly innovative. Harvard is an innovator, and Michigan is absolutely an innovator. I think that comes from leadership, maybe culture. I think it's really interesting. Higher ed it's having seen sort of the sausage making of providing the experience. It's a remarkable. There's so much infrastructure. There's so much goes to having this experience that you have, and it is a remarkable experience because so many people are working really hard to make it that way.
I want to ask you to give them a couple more pieces of advice on the experience that they can leverage from the infrastructure, but I want to ask one more question about Extension Engine first. The growth from 300 to 1,000 and the hopes to expand into Asia and Latin America, Is the plan and the goal to do that without taking on additional investment still?
Yeah, I don't think we'll have equity investors anytime soon. I do think we'll probably work with debt financing at some point. You know, as the company gets bigger,
Sure.
you can afford to have some debt in the company. But you know, I joke that, you know, my exit strategy is death. Because I feel like I found something that I really enjoy doing. Like the company represents like my own personal values, and so it's like if I sold the company, like I'd have to go find a job or something. I have to, you know, and I'd rather not do that. I like what I do. I love what I do. And
Well,
so
it speaks for itself. You're not even referring to it as a job.
it's not a job for me, and I think it's a little bit of a different. I didn't know this was possible. Like when I was, you know, in school coming up, because the only version of entrepreneurship that I saw was this kind of investor-backed venture capital, like start a company that's solving a huge problem and then go do that. This organic kind of bootstrap it, do yourself thing. I think it's a little more common now, but that wasn't really a thing back when I was doing it. And I love that. I love the control. I love being able to say no. I've turned down a lot of clients who wanted to do work with us. You know, the government of Saudi Arabia has tried to hire us twice, and I was like, I can't do work with you. You know, like half of my team can't visit your country, so I won't do it. If I were a venture-backed company, I couldn't do that.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, for me, I love the independence and freedom that comes from not having to focus on investors. And instead, you know, there's this stack of stakeholders. You have investors, you have customers, and you have talent. And our strategy was, let's take investors off the table. We'll do that. Let's focus on customers and talent. And usually everyone says, customer comes first. And we actually flipped that around. And we said, all things being equal, if there's a conflict between talent and customers, we'll pick talent. And what we want to do is recruit people that are extraordinary. They're unhirable. And then we want to go find customer projects that will be a fit and keep them motivated and grow their experience base. And that has created a culture where people love to come work at the company.
That's an incredible anchor, it would seem, to set in as you continue to grow the company. To that point, in the infrastructure that's here provided for them, I want to grant the opportunity for a couple more pieces of advice before we have a minute for student questions. So I'll let you maybe take the slides forward here for a couple other pieces you got. Keep going forward, it'll come up.
Okay, so I had a couple pieces of advice here. And so the first one, talking about team, is hire slow and fire fast. So a big piece of it, most people do the opposite of this. I have done the opposite of this. And the point here is not to be ruthless, but to be thoughtful and to do it well. It's to take time with people. We do this now, is we'll have interviews and we tell people, we recruit them, excuse me, and then we tell them, once they say, yeah, I'd like to come work here, we have another meeting. And that meeting is to tell them everything bad about the company. And we're like, here's everything that no one tells you about the company, and you find out later, we're going to tell you now, and then you're going to redecide if you want to join. And so no one ever joins the company not knowing the mess that they're going to get into.
That's brilliant.
And on the flip side of it is if things are not going well and you get that kind of feeling in the pit of your stomach that it's not a fit, if someone's demonstrating values that don't actually align with our values, then we're very quick to offer them a generous severance and to help them move on to something that is a better fit. And so this idea of hiring slow, take your time. Everyone said it's once in a lifetime. I've never seen a once in a lifetime anything. There's always time, and then on the flip side, move along quickly. The second piece of advice,
That's a good start.
I talked about the case method, so I'll do a cold call. This one's, imagine, Eric, that you're CEO of a company and you make tennis shoes. And let's further imagine that you have this factory that's making tennis shoes, and you've made, a whole lot of these tennis shoes. And better yet, let's imagine you're the CEO of Adidas, and you now have $1 billion worth of Yeezy sneakers. What would you say is on your mind at this point where you're sitting there with all this inventory? Like, what are you thinking about?
How to offload that.
How to get rid of
Yeah.
all these shoes. And you're thinking, can I sell them to somebody? Can I rebrand them? And the entire management team, like your CEO's company, everything you're doing is like, what the heck am I going to do with these sneakers? And this happens all the time in business. And the piece of advice here, which I got from actually a professor at Harvard Business School, his name's Clayton Christensen, really brilliant guy.
Yeah, well known.
I was in his class. That guy cold called me 3 times. And the piece of advice was this: strategy goes in the direction of excess capacity. And this holds true in personal life as well as in business, which is if you have a whole bunch of something, you're going to sit there and figure out, how do I get rid of it? Or how do I, move this along? Or if you want to do something, you want an outcome, you're like, well, what capacity do I need to get to go do that? So let's say you were a startup and you had a whole bunch of product inventory and you wanted to sell it. What are you going to do? You're going to hire some salespeople. So it's creating excess capacity in the direction you want to go. If you've got a big exam, final exam next week, what do? You allocate excess capacity to move in that direction. You block out time to study. So capacity can drag you in a direction. Like if you accidentally acquire a whole bunch of capacity in a direction that maybe you don't want to go, or it can proactively, you can push yourself in a particular direction. This happens as the bigger and bigger the company gets. You lose control as CEO of making tactical decisions, and you have to just kind of sit there and think, what direction am I going to push myself? Where am I going to create capacity, or where do I have excess capacity that I need to get rid of? So when people are like laying off employees, they're crudely by this thing thinking about, well, I have excess capacity in an area I don't need it. So I would say one thing just in life is like, look and think where you have excess capacity. If you got an extra room in your house, go put it on Airbnb. If you got your car sitting there, you can go drive an Uber. That's all managing excess capacity. It's a really interesting and powerful way of thinking about like making business decisions. And the last piece of advice I have is about figuring out what you really want to do. I talked about the GPS system, and that's all the tools you get in school. No one ever tells you where what you should type in as a destination. And it's probably the most important decision in life. It's like, what do you actually want to do? And I don't think there's many classes on it. Maybe there's a class on like what should you do in life, but there's classes on assuming you know what to do. Like you took this class because maybe you said, I want to be an entrepreneur. But like, how do you know if you want to be an entrepreneur? Like that's the important question. And then, so the advice is, or the question you would ask is like, well, how do I answer this question? And I would flip back and say, what's the previous piece of advice? How do you create excess capacity in the direction you wanted to go? So if you wanted to figure out what to do in life, how could you create excess capacity in that direction? Anyone have any ideas?
This is the cold call.
This is a cold call. Oh.
Just like put yourself out there and like, I mean, if you want to try a new job in a new industry, just kind of start applying to jobs in a new industry and then see what sticks, what you like, what you don't like.
That's awesome. Experiment, try different things. Any other ideas? How can you create capacity to figure out what you want to do?
You could expose yourself to new information, like read a different kind of magazine or follow a different, like find different problems to solve or get excited about new things, like learn about a new industry.
Get information, learn about some other stuff. You can learn, you can try. Any other ideas?
Drop out of school.
Drop out of school.
It's viable.
So run a big experiment.
They'll always take you back.
They'll always take you back, that's true. Well, so my piece of advice on this is hire an expert and set aside time. So who's the expert to figure out what you want to do? And I think it's therapists. I never saw a therapist in my entire life until like 4 years ago. And I spent a pile of money and a bunch of time, and it's probably the best money I've spent in my life. And it's really just having an expert to sit down and hold up a mirror and then ask really good questions around what matters to me, what makes me happy, what drives my personal happiness, what makes me unhappy. It does come back to really simple things, but it's unique to you. And so that's the piece of advice. Actually, Michigan, I'm sure, every school has
Resources for that.
free
counseling.
resources on this. It's literally free. You're already paying for it. So go talk to a therapist. You don't have to have a problem. Well, they say you have to have a problem, or that's the thinking, like, oh, I have to have a problem. I'll tell you what your problem is. Your problem is you want to figure out what to do in life. So go have some sessions and talk about it, like what makes me happy and how should I spend my time. Set aside some real time to think about this. Run some experiments, collect lots of information. Maybe you want to drop out, maybe you want to go to grad school, but spend time thinking about this problem. It will not reveal itself unless you put effort into it.
That is a phenomenal anchor to set this in for our class today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.